G'day, I'm Brad, your coach on a couch, and I'm going to be telling today how Australia's Olympians and Olympians around the world in general, with the Olympics barely a month away, are about to behave like those lemmings, those tiny animals with those suicidal instincts that all run towards a cliff because they all follow each other and they jump off the cliff. Now, in terms of Olympians, this is only in a financial sense, okay? Because Olympians, let's be clear, are a subclass, a subcaste, a ghetto, financial ghetto of the sporting world, and they only have themselves to blame. While the Olympics get richer and richer in this last Olympiad, the revenue brought in by the Olympics was just shy of $8 billion. That's $8,000 million, $8 billion with a B. And also, there are about $300 million spent annually by Australia's chief sort of funding agency, Sport Australia, a government agency, about $300 million of its $350 million annual expenditure, which it really does not need to spend on anything. And the Olympians are missing out on all this generous funding money too. In fact, I'll be making clear later that Olympians, the 450 odd Olympians who jump on that plane every 4 years for the Summer Olympics and very likely the Winter Olympics too, they get less than 5% of all that federal money, which is meant to be propping up and guaranteeing and vouchsafing our continuing great performance on the Olympic medal table. And the Olympic medal table is no less than a de facto instrument of foreign policy. That's what it is, a projection of soft power worth so much prestige and esteem to the Australian government, and also probably bringing in money in its own form. Just to put it in perspective, Australia's Foreign Affairs Department, which the Olympics, as a projection of soft power, it comes under the same ambit. Well, they spend $4,000 million every year on projecting our sort of diplomatic strengths. And because the Olympic medal table is something like that, what a shame it is that the ones who go and win our Olympic gold medals are getting less than 5% of the money that is meant to be making sure that we keep doing well at the Olympics. And the ones who actually go and have to win the medals are getting such a small amount. And by the way, that it's about $12 million a year they get, and that works out at about an average of $500 a week for those Olympians. If that rings a bell, it's pretty much welfare, $500 a week. Now, look, if you haven't seen my videos before, I'm Brad Cooper. My own sporting background is, in fact, at the Olympics in swimming. I won a gold medal at the Munich Olympics back in 1972. I have also subsequently done quite a lot of coaching and some journalism, getting my journalism ticket back in the day when you actually had to do a cadetship with a mainstream media organisation. Now, I said before that Olympians have themselves to blame because you rarely see any solidarity or collective advocacy on behalf of Olympians. What is the body that looks after them, that acts in their welfare, in their interest? Well, you can't name it because there probably isn't one. There are various individual sport advocacy groups, but none, I believe, for the whole Olympic team. Now, also, not only that, but they have never made any agitation, made any noise, or jumped up and down. God forbid, any sort of militancy. This is what you need to do. Unfortunately, because athletic careers, particularly Olympic sporting careers, are so short, less than 10 years, they don't benefit from that accumulating those collective and accumulating gains that people who work in the general workforce, in the professions, in the trades, in the services, where careers can last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, well, they accumulate all these hard-placed gains and they pass them on in the forms of unions or some sort of advocacy group into better workplace conditions and bigger salaries. This doesn't happen in Olympic sport because by the time somebody is getting towards the end of their career and they see how far to the back of the queue they have allowed themselves to go because they've been, had their head down in a pool or or running around a track, they have no choice but to get out and get back and get back into those university studies or get back into a trade. They haven't got time to hang around and help the next generation. And so these gains, if there are any gains or insights, they fall off a cliff every generation. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. I'm not making excuses for Olympians, because all they need to do actually is say, oh, well, the Olympics doesn't think we're worth much. We really mustn't be contributing much to that global televised five-ring circus called the Olympics. Obviously, we don't mean much. So how about we tell the Olympics we really don't want to go because we're not valued that much. Obviously, they're not going to miss us if they value us so little. Well, almost the next day, you would get a phone call. So hang on, I think we can work this out. You athletes in the Olympics. For goodness' sake, what is wrong with the Olympics? And like I said, this money, this $350 million that Sport Australia spends supposedly to guarantee that we keep finishing high on the Olympic medal table. Look, for anybody who doesn't understand what soft power is, the value that politicians place on soft power, a default instrument of foreign policy, yes. Well, you just have to have a look at its industrial grade big brother. That's called sport washing. How potent that is as a sanitizer and bleacher and a cleaner of all those blemishes that nations with not much in the way of good governance to recommend them, when they make a slip up in foreign affairs, well, they just sort of, get let's call it bread and circuses. They get something going on the sporting scene. And the best example by far is Saudi Arabia. A few years ago, one of their former nationals, a journalist called Anand Khashoggi, was working in America. Saudi Arabia did not like what he was publishing, the stories he was publishing, critical of the Saudi government. And so they, on a pretext or pretense, I think, of sort of applying for some sort of papers so he could get married, well, they lured him to the Saudi embassy in Turkey, and then not long after he arrived, no fewer than 12 Saudi government operatives jumped on him and killed him. Later, dismembered him, probably with a chainsaw, and then put him in a vat of acid. This is not some macabre tale from medieval times. This actually happened. Put him in a vat of acid, and after a while, drained the contents out of the building in a tube down to a waiting tank down the bottom. Okay. Ever since, they have tried to atone for that, not in any moral sense, but in a populist sense, by trying to buy every sporting tournament and series for sale on the planet. They are still trying to negotiate to buy the Formula One circuit. They are still negotiating to buy the golfing PGA World Tour, okay? They're always holding boxing galas. So this is the power of sport, and athletes must realise this. And athletes are just treated like children. And I think one of the other things I just told you before, how there is a lack of advocacy, an historical flaw, if you like. Also, it may well be that simply because they are intoxicated most of the time with all the publicity they get. Young people, they love being the centre of attention. All the endorphins floating around in their body from training twice a day, putting them in a semi-narcotic state. What do narcotics do for you? Well, they make you feel generous. They make you feel empathetic, magnanimous, benign, hardly the toolkit to go and argue the toss for better conditions, okay? So this is another problem. Now, look, just quickly, Sport Australia could be paying these athletes, and they should be paying the athletes, the ones who go and win the medals, supposedly the stars of the show. They should be paying them the same as their admin staff get. Just by convenient coincidence, there are almost an identical number of administration workers in Sport Australia as there are Olympians. So on that side, I'll call them team admin. On the Olympian side, I will call them the playing staff, as you hear football organisations call their players the playing staff. So they're all staff. They're all contributing towards a common goal of doing very well at the Olympics, and we do. This century, we came fourth in Sydney on the Olympic medals. 4 years later, Athens, we came fourth again. 4 years later, Beijing, we came 6th. 4 years later in London, 8th. Yes, we're slipping up a bit. Rio de Janeiro, 10th. Now, that represented a bit of a red line. The government does not like us getting into double digits because it throws out money at sport. It's got a fairly hard line on this. You keep us in single digits, please, Sport Australia. And if we got another double-digit performance, well, I'm sure Sport Australia might lose. A lot of people might lose their job. Olympians should remember that. They will be the ones thrown under the bus if we do poorly at the Olympics, not the Olympians, okay? Now, by the way, so we did a bit better after that. Tokyo, we got back to 7th, okay? And fingers crossed, let's hope we do a little bit better in Paris, okay? But that might not be a bad thing because then again, all those young people will be intoxicated at keeping us up in the medal table and they may well forget about all their financial problems, okay? But anyway, so that's how well we've gone. But you would think the stars of the show would be worth more than, there's about 3.5% they get. Now, I'm just going to tell you how that money is spent, $350 million, okay? Now, some of it goes into school programs. Well, you shouldn't need school programs. That's what state education department, phys ed classes are for, okay? That should be struck off the list. There's probably $20 or $30 million that could be go to the Olympians' pockets. What else? They have community sports. Community sports is just a very loose, informal, facsimile of the more formalised sporting systems which conduct junior championships and have junior coaching and elite coaching. So that's community sport. You don't need that because I'm sure there is a very, very small flow on from community sport. These are people who do not generally like to make a big commitment to sport. Then there is grassroots. Now, this is pretty heavy duty stuff. This makes sure that all those programs in those different sports, whether it's gymnastics or cycling or swimming or whatever, have appropriate structures in place in terms of properly affiliated and constituted clubs and regional associations. This is the heavy hitters, and it's the grassroots job to make sure that there are the appropriate structures in place to have coaching accreditation, things like that. Okay, so what else we've got the trickle down effect. This is just the government trying to capitalise on Mr. and Mrs. Australia and their 1.7 kids gorging themselves on watching the Australian Olympic team do well once every 2 or 4 years, if you want to count the Winter Olympics, and trying to convert that into some sort of lifestyle changes, some sort of anyway. So all of this is called by academics a broad social dividend of all that expenditure. But for every academic and expert saying we need to spend this sort of money to deliver a broad social dividend, there are just as many academics falling over laughing to think that you could ever sort of get hold of enough data to show whether all those projects work. But in the meantime, Sport Australia becomes a bigger and bigger bureaucracy, so much so that there are now as many bureaucrats and admin workers as there are on the Olympic team. But how much does team admin get paid? I told you before, the same number of people, 450 against 450 Olympians. Okay, well, they get paid $60 million a year. They get paid public service pay grades like public servants in Canberra. $60 million a year they get. How much did the Olympians get? I think I told you before, $12 million. So Sport Australia is saying that we think our team admin is making 5 times the contribution to our preparation to do well at the Olympics, 5 times the value of the ones who actually have to train for 4 years and have to go and win those medals for us. Okay? So now how unjust is that? Yet the Olympians don't see those numbers. Anybody can look up the annual report of Sport Australia. That's where you get these figures, okay? They get $500 a week. They're on welfare, our Olympians. Yes, some are getting a little bit more than that because it is a merit-based reward, but a lot more are getting less than $500 a week. But I've just told you that Sport Australia is saying outright that they think their team admin contributes 5 times the value towards the preparation of the Olympics. This is like saying that in terms of behind-the-scenes workers, which team admin is, this is like saying Nicole Kidman gets up at those annual virtual world acting championships called the Oscars, gets up on stage to be presented with her Oscar, knowing that her behind-the-scenes people, her makeup artists, her set workers, her caterers, her costume people get 5 times the salary that she does. How ridiculous would that be? The star of the show and the athletes, Olympic athletes, are the star of the show. So they live in Disneyland, the Olympic athletes. They have no idea what they're worth, quite obviously. Okay, so, and one more thing. How much money does Sport Australia waste? Well, a few years ago, it was in charge of the Australian Institute of Sport. Now, there are a lot of problems with the Institute of Sport in the mid-teens of this century, 2015, 2016. There were all sorts of inquiries into alleged drug use because we had so many former communist East German coaches there. A lot of that culture began to creep into the AIS. There were no fewer than 2 separate government inquiries into drug use, performance-enhancing drug use allegations. There was the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sex abuse vis-a-vis the AIS gymnastics program, where there were allegations of abuse, that's sexual and emotional and physical abuse by coaches there, okay? The wheels were falling off. It had seen, its day had come and gone, okay? It used to be, a place where it's got about 10 or 20 huge buildings. It's on about nearly 200 acres. It's a very valuable piece of real estate, okay? But it used to be the place where elite athletes used to go and train in high-performance programs to prepare us for the Olympics. But it got decommissioned. The federal government said, well, we've got to stop all that, okay? And all the sports then went their own way with their own separate funding channels. But in the meantime, what did Sport Australia do? Instead of sacking all the people that worked at the AIS, which was entitled and should be obliged to do, it kept them on in all sorts of new job descriptions. Some became tourist guides. Some became childminders. Yes, that's right. They had a child minding centre. This is where they had the child abuse in the gymnastics program. That's right. Or they became some sort of, gardeners or maintenance people. So the $50 million, it kept paying the staff there $50 million. No less a figure than Mike Tancred from the Australian Olympic Committee, the AOC, castigated Sport Australia for keeping those people on and keeping spending that $50 million. He claimed that money should have gone into Olympians' pockets. So there's $50 million that Sport Australia has already robbed Olympians of. Anybody can look this up. Mike Tancred, okay? Now, for somebody from the Olympic family, and by the way, we see that the Olympics themselves, with $8,000 billion in revenue in the last Olympia, do not pay their competitors, their performers, because they're entertainers, because Olympians are no less performers and entertainers than actors and musicians when they compete in that 5-ring circus, okay? But for an organisation which does not pay its performers and entertainers, Mike Tancred, for him to accuse Sport Australia of robbing Australia's Olympians of $50 million without any fear of being labelled a hypocrite, this just tells you the breathtaking scale of arrogance and cynicism that Sport Australia was exercising, okay? Now, I believe that our Olympians should get paid exactly the same pay rate as a mid-level public servant executive, around $250,000 a year. Now, if there were 400 on the Olympic team instead of 450, that would make the maths a lot easier. In fact, I think you can jettison 50 people because everybody knows that a very small quantity of Olympians actually win our medals, okay, without being offensive, without being, super critical. I think we can trim that team by 50, and so there would be 400 Olympians getting $250,000 a year each. That is over 4 years, that's 400 Olympians getting $1 million, okay? But so it's $400 million, but on a year-to-year basis, that is only $100 million. I've already said Sport Australia spends $350 million. Quite a lot of that is highly contested expenditure, and I've already told you $50 million a year could be going in Olympians' pockets, and that's from 2016, probably worth $70 million a year. So how much do we need to get parity? $100 million a year. So we only really need to find $30 million a year. So yes, of course, Sport Australia can afford that. And by the way, by getting $1 million for jumping on that plane to the Olympics, we definitely would not need a grassroots program, because the incentive of getting $1 million to represent your country at the Olympics, well, every up-and-coming 16, 17-year-old swimmer, cyclist, javelin thrower around Australia. Well, that would be like throwing superphosphate on those grassroots for those young up-and-coming athletes. Okay, superphosphate. So get rid of the grassroots program, get rid of the schools program, community sports program, and basically you could even get a refund for the taxpayer. Okay, so now there's a lot more I could say about this, but that just goes to show how poorly, how shabbily Olympians are treated. And like I said before, they are about to jump off the cliff again like a bunch of lemmings, because they are about to give away their biggest asset. That biggest asset, how much service they are to their country every 4 years. They are about to hop on the plane and go to Paris without using that as a lever, their contribution, okay? Somebody might have had a few words to someone about it, and somebody might have said, well, look, how about we talk about it when we come back from Paris? Yes, because there's 4 years to wait till the next Summer Olympics, okay? Yeah, sure, do that. Give it away in the time being. It's like giving your neighbour your car, your brand new car. So, look, you keep it, I feel generous today. And then tomorrow saying, oh, look, you know that car I gave you? You think you might be able to just pay me something for it? No way, okay? If you give something away, you give something away. So if Olympians are giving those services away free to the Olympics and free to their country, well, they can't negotiate when they come back, okay? You've got to be hard-headed. These people who run these organisations, you know, the Sport Australia, Swimming Australia, Cycling Australia, Gymnastics Australia, Rowing Australia, they're all hard-headed corporate people. They don't give anything away. They don't even give funding away. To get your funding, if you're a swimmer or an Olympic cyclist or something, you've got to sign these caveats, effectively gagging you. Have you heard athletes talk about their funding? No, because they're not allowed to talk about it, okay? They've got to wear a 24/7 good behaviour anklet as well, so they don't let their hair down in public, unlike politicians who can, who's that National Party guy? What's his name? It was when he's back in the middle of town on a mobile phone. He was drunk or something. You can't do that as a Barnaby Joyce. That's him. You can't do that as a sportsman. You'd lose your funding, for goodness sake. This is the harsh constraints that are put on these athletes. Okay, they're treated like slaves, not heroes. So anyway, look, there's so much wrong with the way this whole model, but the Olympians should wake up for themselves. If they just put their feet down before Paris and all voted not to go, there would be mayhem, and they wouldn't be thrown on the bus. The government would be getting them to beg. The government would be begging them to, come to some sort of terms. Sport Australia would be thrown under a bus, because they would have shown that they are not competent. They were incapable of coming to terms with Olympians, okay? This is how negotiations have been done for workplace gains and better salaries in the workplace for decades and decades and decades, okay? But the Olympians are too timid, which is very odd, because, sport, what are the old cliches? It's meant to be character building. It's meant to create a healthy sense of risk assessment that's a risk assessment. But these athletes do not seem to want to show any of that. They must be worried about the level of public opprobrium they might invoke by putting their feet down. But for as many people who would be critical of them, well, there would probably be 10 others saying, "Good on you, Olympians, for having a go, for sticking up for yourself," because the public is sick of hearing about Olympians coming back from the Olympians and saying, "Oh no, we compete for Australia, but we don't get paid. We feel exploited." Well, stop talking and do something, Olympians. Anyway, I'm Brad, your coach on a couch, and I've been very happy to get that off my chest. I hope you've learned something, and see you next time.